What I'd like to do now is introduce Conal McFeely. Conal and I had the pleasure of hanging out together on Saturday afternoon, which you might remember was a terrible day to introduce someone to Auckland, Tamaki Makaurau. And Conal, though, was quite happy because it did remind him a little bit of his homeland of Ireland. And we went out to the coast and we walked, and the wind blew us around. But he shared some of his story, and there are some striking similarities to some of the pressures and tensions and the history between our last speaker, Ngāti, and an island. And Conal has come all the way, and when I met him on Saturday, he'd been awake for about 26 hours. He was looking remarkably good on it, and we had a very intense conversation up at the Titirangi Hardware Cafe, and I now look back at it and think, my God, I wish I could do that after 26 hours of no sleep. Would you please give a very warm welcome to our first international speaker, Conal McFeely.
Mr. Mayor, I think you've left, but Papa Fred, distinguished guest, fellow cooperators, good morning. It's a great honour to be given the opportunity to share my community's social economy journey and to address this particular audience. I am Conal McFeely. I work for Creggan Enterprises, a community-owned enterprise based in Derry in Northern Ireland. On behalf of the community that I represent, I offer our condolences and sympathy to all those families who lost loved ones and who were injured and who were affected directly by the earthquake in February. As a community which only knows too much about suffering, we can empathise with what happened in your recent tragedy. 15 years ago, I had the privilege of meeting Lindsay Jeffs. I met him in Derry. He was among a range of grassroots community activists who came from all around the globe to share their values of local ownership, Indigenous rights, and people-centred development. It was a powerful group containing many heavy hitters who came together in the spirit of friendship and cooperation to help advance democratic and peaceful means of resolving the political conflict in Northern Ireland. And some of the most inspirational people from that particular group came from New Zealand, and they were also led by Lindsay. Doesn't surprise me, as Lindsay is one of the leaders of this particular movement as well. So when Lindsay contacted me in February, prior to the earthquake, and asked would I share our experience of the social economy, how could I refuse? Today, wherever we live on the globe, we're all suffering from the fallout from the financial crisis caused by those who put profit and greed before the common good. Today, we're still being told that we must be competitive, whether that's in business, in education, in community, or indeed in ordinary, everyday life. The message is the same. You have to be competitive. Competition has been sold to us as the key to a more productive and wealthier economy, an economy which will be strong, will be successful, and where the weak will fall by the wayside. For me, this is the law of the jungle, and has brought misery and despair to many millions of people in our world today. However, can we challenge that? I believe that the idea of cooperation challenges the law of the jungle, and it rejects the notion that only the strong will survive. There are quite a few examples of different social and economic systems where the emphasis is put on each of us giving us of our best as a member, as a team, united by the common good. And we just heard one of those presentations before me. It was the English Quaker, John Bellers, who first devised the idea of college of industry in the late 17th century to address the problem of unemployment. His approach was actually given the seal of approval by Karl Marx in Das Kapital. 100 years later, the Welsh social reformer Robert Owen set up the Villages of Cooperation in New Lanark. And that also then influenced the Rochdale pioneers, who then embraced the cooperative ideal and took those ideas forward and made them real. And my own country has also made its own contribution, producing in the 19th century moral economist. I don't think there is many economists at the moment that are moral. It also gave us William Thompson. He was a Cork man who was described by James Connolly as the first great Irish socialist. A century later, we produced Plunkett, the founder member of the Irish Farming Cooperative Society, which still operates successfully today. I believe we owe a huge debt to these pioneers. They were visionaries who rejected the law of the jungle and the notion that only the strong could survive. The cooperative and social economy movement has made immense strides since those particular times, since Bellers and so forth, in my own country and in Britain, indeed here in New Zealand, indeed all over the world. Yesterday I was at the workshop, the masterclass, and all around the room, the people in there were clearly the people who were now taking forward that message from the past. Today I would like to obviously talk about my own journey and what brought me into the social economy movement. My journey and the story of Creggan Enterprises was motivated by both political and market failures. A key event in my journey happened in 1984 when a factory called Mullins, a major multinational corporation, which employed some 437 workers in Derry, including myself, decided that the factory would close. I was elected at that particular time as a shop steward in that particular factory, and I was invited to a communications meeting in a local hotel. And there was 3 executives sitting, and they read out a notice. And the first words, which I'll never ever forget as long as I live, was the discontinuance of the London dairy operation. Dairy has got one name, and it's got another name, which is Londonderry, which is also part of our conflict. It's also got its own indigenous name, which is Dura, Column Kill. But it's obviously at that particular time and still known officially as Londonderry, although there's a campaign at the moment to change it back to its original indigenous name. It took 6 minutes for those executives to read the statement, and they also said that they wanted the factory to close at 11 o'clock. So 6 minutes to close a factory. And also, they say to 500 workers and to a local community that you didn't matter. Also, what had happened at that particular time was that I remember that particular day quite well. I obviously was the person who had to inform all the workers that the factory was closed. But in the midst of all the chaos, and you can imagine the chaos, people being told the factory had closed and the implication that would actually have in the local community. But all during that particular time, there was one elderly gentleman, as I thought was elderly. I'm like he's the same age as him now. He continued to work. He was a blue card holder, and somebody who's a blue card holder is somebody who's obviously has a disability. And he drove electric forklift truck, and he came up and he said, "Conal, is it true the factory's closed?" And I says, "Yes." He says, "What's happening?" And I said, "Well, look, we're going to have a union meeting tonight at 7 o'clock. And as a result of that, I said, come up and we'll see what we're going to do." We then decided not to have the union meeting, but we didn't tell everybody. We decided a small group decided to occupy the factory. The man concerned went to the union meeting, knocked at the door, couldn't get in, and actually took a heart attack and died. So therefore, as a result of that impact of the closure, and this is how you actually treat people, I felt that there's something fundamentally wrong with the fickle nature of multinational capital and the way people actually treated workers. So as a result of that, I occupied the factory, and then we began a community campaign. As a result of that community campaign, we managed to convince the parent company, in actual fact, we should set up a workers' cooperative. But what was actually very, very, very important at that particular time was the collective response of the workers, the collective response of the community, the collective response of wider society within the city, because it was actually, this was a particular incident that was actually going to affect not only one individual, but the entire city. Out of that, we managed to actually set up Maydown Precision Engineering. That, I can report today that that company is still in operation 26 years later. But as a result of that particular experience, I began to look at the history of the cooperative movement, in particular, the history of the credit union movement in my city. And that decided me to leave that particular company and to go back and to work in terms of community development. And today, in terms of the slideshow, which I will show, I will outline some successful outcomes relating to Creggan Enterprises. But I have to tell you that that success did not come easy. So I will take you through it. So what I would like to do in terms of the presentation is basically give you a brief overview of what we mean by the social economy enterprise, what's its key characteristics, the structure and the scale of the sector, and where it fits within the wider economy. And these are some of the issues that came up at yesterday's masterclass. So that's what I hope to do. So what is a social enterprise? I would see a social enterprise as a project that actually has trading income, and it comes from a range of issues in terms of sales, services, or goods. It can actually receive statutory grants and subsidies. It can actually go after public sector contracts and to provide services and goods, particularly in disadvantaged communities. It can actually bring in grants and loans from other sources, such as other charities, credit unions, corporate funders, etc. Local fundraising, but very, very importantly, voluntary labour and voluntary input. And to me, its key characteristics is actually up there, but it's about initiatives which generate and retain income and wealth, social, economic, and environmental within local communities. And they're run by collective groups of people as opposed to individuals, which is the conventional capitalist model. This can be a community, workers, or users of a service. That would be the key characteristics based on my experience. Also within the Northern Ireland context and also within the British context, there's a range of structures. And they are all based on the principles of cooperation, and going back right to the funders of the cooperative movement. They're about people coming together to work collectively for the common and shared goals. They can be credit unions. For example, in Ireland, credit unions are among the most successful and largest social economy structures in Europe. In Derry, for example, we have 4 credit unions. Derry is a small place, about 108,000 people. And I would actually say 80% of the population are members of our credit unions. Very, very important in terms of that. Agricultural co-ops, community businesses, and housing associations. I know this is a very difficult maybe diagram to read. I've also, in terms of the workshop tomorrow, but I think this is a very, very, very important diagram. And basically what it's actually saying is that the social economy is an integral component of the third system and is viewed as a distinctive element of the economy. The third system operates alongside and in collaboration with the private and public sector systems. Each of these sectors have different approaches and values in which way they function and behave. The private sector is about private gain. The public sector is about the state planning and the delivery of services. The third system, the social economy, blends self-help, mutuality, cooperation for the common good. It's also important to say at this stage, because even at yesterday's masterclass, I think you don't realise the scale of this particular sector. Half of the world's population, 3 billion people, are to a significant extent benefit from the social economy. We're a global player. In terms of the scale of the sector, I've looked at the UK, I've looked at Northern Ireland, and I've also looked at Ireland. Northern Ireland has a population of 1.5 million people, maybe the same size as Auckland. Yet we have nearly 5,000 community-based organisations with a massive volunteering base of almost 90,000 people. It's estimated the social economy sector employs some 32,000 people with an annual income of 570 million and an asset base of 737 million. In the Republic of Ireland, its most successful model, as I've already said, is the credit union, which there's some 525, and they've over 3 million members. And Ireland has only got a population base of just 5 million people. So it's a very, very significant player. So and again, it employs 3,500 workers, and again, 9,500 volunteers. For me, this is the most important slide that I will actually show you. And it's based on my own experience of what happened in the factory and the approach which we took to that, but also how we actually developed the model, which I will talk about in a moment in terms of Creggan Enterprises. I call it obviously the social economy flowchart, but experience has taught me that the most successful social enterprise must be rooted in community development processes. Because I believe the natural evolution of community development is a move towards community economic development, because it's about people, it's about local needs, it's about local ownership, and it's about the common good. If these ingredients are not actually tied into your social enterprise, then it's not a social enterprise and it won't be sustained. So I know there's a lot of detail, again, in this particular flowchart, but again, I will discuss it at the workshop on Wednesday in more detail. So now we'd like to come on to the case study of Creggan Enterprises. In the Creggan Enterprises case study, I seek to demonstrate what a community can achieve for itself, even one that has suffered from political conflict, underinvestment, urban decline, industrial decline, and disengagement from the statutory sector. The Creggan community, at the height of the conflict in Northern Ireland, was known as the Gaza Strip. And the reason it was known as the Gaza Strip, the entire neighbourhood had been ring-fenced by the British Army. You couldn't get in and out unless you went through an army checkpoint. And there was constant battles on a daily basis between young people within that particular community and the state forces. It's also the area which gave rise to what was known as Bloody Sunday. Bloody Sunday, all the people that died on Bloody Sunday in January 1972 came from my neighbourhood. Indeed, I was on the march on Bloody Sunday, and one of the young people that I went to a march with on that day was shot dead and killed, marching for civil rights. It also has a community which is the highest levels of disadvantage anywhere in Northern Ireland. And it was also a community at that particular time where apathy and disillusionment was at its height. So where are we? So I thought I'd put up this map. We're an island on the periphery of Europe, just like New Zealand, also an island. The photographs actually show one of the buildings at the top shows a new building which we've obviously built as a community as part of our social enterprise. It also shows the direct ruins of an abandoned factory where the British Army used to be located, but it was also a site of yet another multinational closure. And during the 1970s, as I'm saying, the British Army obviously were based on the site. And the photograph at the bottom shows a factory at working, which was called Birmingham Sound Recorders. The older people in the audience might remember the old gramophone records. Well, again, this was a large multinational corporation that employed some 2,000 people, and it closed its door in 1966. The reason I say that, because the city Derry as a city, it was its largest employer. And even to this day, as a result of that one multinational closure, Derry as a city has never ever recovered. So, and there's been quite a lot of other multinational closures since. So I thought I would give you the current updated stats in terms of the socioeconomic indicators of both Derry at a glance, and also if you dig down deep into a local neighbourhood, which is Creggan, at a glance. So both these figures actually show the entire city centre was actually wiped out as a result of the bombing campaign in terms of the fight for, as Republicans actually seen at that particular time, for the self-determination of the Irish people. In terms of Creggan, Creggan as a public housing estate was established in 1946 as a public housing estate, mainly to house, not because there was a housing shortage, and there was a massive housing shortage, but it was actually built to actually maintain a system called gerrymandering. And gerrymandering within the city was to ensure that the unionist minority, right, maintained control of the local city council. So that when the housing estate was built up on the hill, it was built without any provision for shopping, health, or recreation facilities. And at its height, over 18,000 people lived in Creggan, but they had no amenities. So it was always destined to become an area of disadvantage, or as people would call it, a ghetto. So what we were trying to do in terms of our social enterprise, we were attempting to tackle conflict, political conflict. We also were dealing with the issue of industrial and urban decline. And in these four particular photographs, I think they're obviously very important because they're actually on the site which we now operate within. The first photograph would obviously show a riot on the site. There's a likelihood I was one of the young people involved in the riot at that particular time. It also shows a derelict factory in terms of urban decline. But it also shows you, even at that stage, the people's shop. We had one shop to serve a population of 18,000 people. Another one is obviously an image of, in the Catholic Church up in Creggan, was the funerals of those who were killed on Bloody Sunday. So that's the context. So what's the values and principles that actually drive Creggan Enterprises? And I actually believe, going right back to the previous chart, which I've showed, that because of the process of community development, self-help, and the social economy sector, that's the value base that actually drives Creggan Enterprises. And what it's actually managed to do is it ensured that Creggan and the surrounding environment of the Bogside and Brandywell areas, that the stigma of living in those particular communities has been reversed and is now viewed as somewhere where people want to live, work, and to raise a family. But it also had another impact. As a result of what we actually did in this particular community, we now have a situation where the city vision process that's just been completed within the last 2 or 3 months is that they're now actually saying the way forward for the city is to actually create a mixed and balanced economy, and part of that mixed and balanced economy must include the social economy. And I would say to the people in Christchurch, and I would say to Lindsay, the devastation which has actually taken place there, the social economy sector led the revival of our city centre. Do not let those who set up that board shut you out. Go and fight for it and get back in and take control of it. So this slide, I want to talk about renewal and investment. It actually shows that these photographs, again, the buildings that we've built. We also said we were going to actually rebuild it, and we were going to make sure that we were going to build it the way the community wanted to build it, and we wanted to build quality products and quality buildings. The buildings actually show some of those buildings on the site of the last photographs where the riots and everything was. We've got, obviously, the building with the big glass windows is the Rathmore Centre, which we've set up our own retail centre, community space, training, etc. The other one is our, obviously, incubation space in terms of factory. But We always say that it's not about buildings. We're about people. Go back to the thing about another situation. The photograph of the people who are actually sitting down is a program which we set up, an intermediary labour market, dealing with the long-term unemployed, moving people back into the world of work, and also moving them on to set up their own businesses, or back into, obviously, education. But the other thing which we do is that we have fun. It's important to have fun. So we've also created an annual revival festival in the car park, and that actually shows what we're doing. So we're simply saying we're not just building physical infrastructure, we're building a facility which actually affects the community, own, design, and to use it creatively. So it's about creating creative space. So creating change, very difficult. So when the process began, there was widespread apathy and disillusionment. I was the person that organised the first meeting after leaving the factory at Maydown Precision Engineering to try to do what we did in an industrial setting, to do it in a community setting. Told you there was 18,000 people lived in the community. Such was the level of apathy. 6 people showed up. That's how bad it was, because at that particular time, we had a situation where lots of people were actually fighting for the control of the actual community. On one hand, you had the IRA, Irish Republican Army, were trying to control it. You had the more conservative forces within the community trying to control it, which was the Social Democratic Labour Party. You had the Catholic Church trying to control it. You had the British Army trying to control it. And the community were being pulled all over the place. And the whole community infrastructure had actually collapsed. There was 2 organisations at that particular time that were obviously operating when we called our first meeting. One was St Vincent de Paul, which was dealing with the worst aspects of poverty within the estate. For example, the main diet, the main meal for families within that particular estate at that stage was a pint of milk and a loaf of bread. That would have been what their daily diet was. I come from a family of 5 brothers and 5 sisters. And the fact is that there was high levels of unemployment and disadvantage. There wasn't much money to go around. So you could actually understand why there was obviously an issue around apathy and disillusionment. Today, as a result of trying to create that change, what we decided to do was that we would actually look what others do. So we began to look locally about what was happening in terms of the self-help movement. We also looked at nationally what was happening in terms of the self-help movement, and we also looked at internationally. The thing that actually came out all the time was that if we were going to change the position of our particular community, the key thing was that community development was the key to success of that particular process. And that's what we did in terms of obviously creating change. So factors in our success. It's okay to be angry. You should be angry if you're not being listened to. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. If you don't challenge the status quo, nothing changes. So I think that the status quo always has to be challenged. I also think naivety at times was our best strength. It's also okay to be naive. It's good to be naive because you don't know what barriers is in front of you. And you're not yet cynical. So I think that's important. So I think that says that. This is also important, the importance of networking and coalition building. Network and partnership with other sectors was also key to our success. But, I would stress, but it must be driven by the local community. And it also must be driven by local needs. And I also think, going back to what the Mayor made reference to and others made reference to this morning about the regeneration and the renewal of Christchurch, make sure you're part of that agenda. Maybe the people in Christchurch should get angry. It's just continued. So I'd like to talk about some of the outcomes that have been achieved. And I was also very taken by the previous presentation and what they actually achieved. The outcomes in terms of where we were at I think that the outcomes have been phenomenal. However, it's important to say, and they're all up there and they're all listed, and they're just a snapshot, but I would simply say we also need to talk about the importance of social profit, not just financial profit. So I think that the social profit that we've also resulted as a result of our values and our value base is that we now have a high quality community asset for the community that was previously on a derelict site. It's a house, it's just a hotbed, it's a hub now for local businesses and community services. We've created job opportunities, including an intermediate labour market, and that is now, as I've already alluded to earlier on, now part of the wider city vision. Indeed, within the last 12 months, Derry, which is an area city, also made a bid to become the first ever UK City of Culture. And it actually won that award. And that's going to happen in the year 2013. But what's actually highly significant about that the people who led the application was the social economy sector and the people involved in the arts and obviously culture. So therefore, again, this is where the social economic movement can actually lead the full regeneration of a city. The other issue which we don't tend to talk about, but I think it's obviously of crucial importance, we have also played a leading role in terms of peace building, and we've also taken the lead in areas of common interest across all particular communities in terms of the process of healing and reconciliation. And I would also again like to pay tribute to Lindsay and the people from New Zealand who came to Derry 15 years ago and talked about the importance of people-centred development. We learned from that and we've continued to work with it, and that was one of the reasons why we actually had the confidence to go forward and to do what we do in terms of peace building and reconciliation work. So it's not just about Bill Clinton, and it's not just about Tony Blair, and it's not just about Bertie Ahern, the prime ministers, and when these things actually happen, they take the credit. It was actually a bottom-up initiative that actually brought about the peace process and our agreement. So it's the first time I've had an opportunity in 15 years to say thank you. So, key is it's about putting people first. It's always about putting people first, and that's what we're about. So, I also think this is important. It's how we actually communicate with the population. So, we've also set up our community revival gallery, and this is as well. These are very important because we take an innovative and a visionary approach to community arts as a means of advancing community ownership. Because when people talk about Northern Ireland and people talk about the conflict and people talk about Creggan and they talk about marginalised communities, it's always in the negative. When I get up in the morning to go to work, I just see positivity all around me. The people I meet are extremely positive, right? And what we wanted to do was then to tell the stories of ordinary people within the community and what they do on a daily basis. And when we started to do that, then we created a big, massive outdoor gallery. And in actual fact, we're the largest outdoor gallery in the island of Ireland. But it also had an economic impact because we were trying to actually attract investment into our particular locality. And in terms of the retail units and the supermarket that we established, as a result of actually creating this vision outside the centre, it actually increased the footfall within the centre, therefore helping to sustain the local businesses that actually went in there. So arts is obviously something that's also, it's got a major economic impact for our particular community. I'd like to leave you, maybe coming to the end now, the triple bottom line. I think is very important. I think you should read it slowly. The theme of this conference is about making it happen from possibility to profitability. So I think it is important to remind ourselves of the wisdom of this 19th century Cree Indian. So it's, and I think that all businesses are not about profit, and they also need to be accountable to local communities. So I think that's a very important thing. So from my point of view, and I'll come to possibly conclusion now at the moment. The great Norwegian playwright, Henrik, has been said, community is like a ship. Everyone ought to take the helm. That's precisely what happens under the social economy. And I think in terms of the debates that you're going to have over the next couple of days, I think it is now your time in New Zealand to actually make sure the social economy is the centre of building a mixed and balanced economy here in New Zealand. Thank you very much.